שנה הבאה בירושלים, next year in Jerusalem. Over there in the...
Welcome to Theology in Perspective, the Bible teaching ministry of Dr. Daniel Woodhead.
Welcome back. This is Theology in Perspective, and I'm Dr. Daniel Woodhead. I am again blessed that you could join us today as we look at the Lord's discussion of, as in the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Now, what the Lord was saying when he said that was that the conditions on this earth today are going to be just as bad as they were before he destroyed the earth with a flood many, many years ago. He did destroy the earth once with a flood, but the destructive means in the next destruction, if you will, was going to be fire, with nuclear weapons probably contributing to it because they are in the earth now and people will use these. They were made to be used, they weren't made to be sitting on shelves. But it's the sin on the earth during both instances that had degraded to the point where violence was rampant and all flesh was corrupted. The earth will continue to degenerate to the point that the Lord will rapture us off the face of the earth. That is the believers, the genuine church, and we will be leaving only the unsaved, which will be a massively sinful population. The Great Tribulation is going to follow this. Now, Adam, the first man, wrote parts of Genesis. I know many think that Moses wrote it, but Moses was the redactor. He put together a lot of other writings for Genesis. He did write Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But Adam wrote that he predicted that both the flood and the fire elements are going to destroy the earth. Now, Josephus, the first century Jewish historian, wrote about this, and this is what he said. Adam's prediction that the world was to be destroyed at one time by the force of fire and at another by the violence and quantity of water, they made two pillars, the one of brick and the other of stone, and they inscribed their discoveries on them both. That in the case the pillar or brick should be destroyed by the flood, the pillar of stone might remain and exhibit those discoveries to mankind. Now, and also inform them that there was another pillar of brick erected by them. Now, this remains in the land of Syriad to this day. Now, Syriad is another name for Egypt, and this was written about 68 A.D. Now, in part one of this series, we laid out the reasons and the sinfulness of humankind which caused the Lord God to bring the flood upon the earth. In this sequel, second message, if you will, we're going to elaborate on some of the activities which will bring the second cataclysm, if you will, on the earth. They were listed in part one, and I'm going to show you here what they are again. Preoccupation with physical appetites, rapid advances in technology, grossly materialistic attitudes and interests, uniformitarian philosophies, and an inordinate devotion to pleasure and comfort, and no concern for God in thought or deed, and a disregard for the sanctity of marriage, a rejection of God's word, a population explosion, a wide spreading of violence, corruption throughout society, a preoccupation with illicit sexual activity, widespread words and thoughts of blasphemy, organized satanic activity, and finally the promulgation of abnormal depravity. Now, as I mentioned last week, we're going to look at some of these on a weekly basis and go into more detail with them. I can tell you this, though, that the cause of the flood, besides the gross sinfulness of human beings, was the appearance of fallen angels in the earth the Bnei Elohim, seeking to destroy mankind by having intercourse with promiscuous women before the flood, and that brought on this ungodly offspring called the Nephilim. Now the Nephilim died out in the flood. The flood destroyed them. Some would ask, well, how can angels have intercourse with human women? Well, they take on the form of young men, as we've seen in a whole host of spots in the Bible. So this is not unusual. It is as far as we would think, but it's not unusual in terms of the Bible. Now, right now, there is a preoccupation with physical appetites. Now, I'm going to touch on the first two today of those list of 15. Luke 17, verses 27 to 28 says, "They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, also, as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed." Now, as the Lord is explaining the circumstances of the period just before the Great Tribulation and his return to this earth, he mentions several activities which one could just reasonably view as day-to-day living, modern, normal day-to-day living. But he references two periods of human history where these activities are taking place just prior to a huge cataclysm, a judgment of enormous proportions. One was the flood, the other was the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. People were dining, drinking, getting married, conducting business activities, and farming, as well as constructing buildings. Now, on the face of these comments, the activities seem innocent enough, and they don't appear sufficiently evil to warrant a worldwide flood and the destruction of these two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, and divine retribution. What the Lord is saying here, though, is their preoccupation was with these activities and not him. Now, he said, "You will turn away from me," in Deuteronomy 31:29, "and you will fall away this night." Jesus said that to his apostles. It's recorded in Matthew 26:31 and Mark 14:27. In Matthew 24:10, Jesus said, "Many will fall away, and when the persecution comes, many will fall away." Matthew 13:21, Mark 4:17. They believe for a while, and in times of temptation they fall away. You know, the day of the Lord, the Great Tribulation, is going to be preceded by an apostasy. And in the last days, some are going to fall away from the faith. And it's going to be a faith they never really had. They just pretended. They thought it was something that was appropriate to espouse, a belief in Jesus or going to church or something to that effect. But they're not real believers. They haven't really taken God into their spirit. God's Spirit in. Now we're going to look at the various topics of measures that the human has implemented to turn from God and make his own way in the world without God. Further, it's quite apparent that mankind wants to make the post-fall conditions better to try and find a way to perfection without God. All the while, it is God that caused the conditions on the earth because of the sin that came into the world. Let me say that another way. Adam and Eve brought sin into the world. These were our first parents. They had an ideal existence. They caused the fall. Well, actually, it was Satan that caused the fall, tempting the woman, but they took the bait. They did it. Adam followed her into perdition. So sin comes in, the corruption comes in, God's judgment comes on this earth, and it corrupts everything. If Adam and Eve had turned back to God, if Adam and Eve had came back to God, and the whole human psyche would go back to God, God would have restored things. That didn't happen. And God knew it wasn't going to happen. So what does mankind do? Turns farther away from God and says, I can do this on my own. I am going to make the conditions on this earth better for me without God. Now, I want you to keep that in mind as we go through the rest of today's message, discussing what people have done before the flood and just before Christ is going to return. Now, in Genesis chapter 4, verse 22, there is a discussion of a person named Zillah. Zillah, it says, she also bare Tubal-Cain, the forger of every cutting instrument of brass and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Now, why do I bring this out? Because in-depth study of the Hebrew language and archaeology lets us know that Tubal-Cain's brother Jubal, which is in the text, not that particular verse though, produced musical instruments, the harp and the flute. Tubal-Cain's, he made implements that were tools out of bronze and iron to make life enjoyable, sort of. He also made implements of war. Now these are the same as the Tiburoni or the Moshkoi that are referred to by Herodotus, the Greek historian, in his histories. He just used different names. These places were known for their trafficking and precious metal vessels. Now Ezekiel 27:13 also refers to this, and the two elements of the name given to the son of Zillah both mean the same thing. They both designate his profession, the individuals, and the second element really explains the first, so that the meaning was probably lost to the Israeli audience, and there's just no memory of the Stone Age. But the narrative recognizes the discovery of the use of metals to constitute a revolutionary advance in the progress of civilization. Keep that in mind now. Progressives allowing the development of new and just more efficient tools and weapons. Now, this man, Tubal-Cain, was the first to make weapons of war, and it was a rapid advancement. The order in which principal metals are mentioned in the first 5 books of the Bible are gold, copper, and iron, and that reflects the history of metallurgy. Tubal-Cain's father was Lamech. He was a bigamist. And he said, and Lamech said unto his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man for wounding me, and a young man for bruising me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. So what he was stepping up here was the opposition to anybody opposing him by implementing violence, big violence, war, death. You know, copper that's seen in some of these verses here, these metals, is an alloy of, or bronze actually, is an alloy of copper and tin. The metal was already worked extensively in southern Mesopotamia and Sinai as early as the 3rd millennium. Interesting, the Hebrew word for bronze is nechoshet. Nechoshet, copper or bronze, if you will. This is the same Hebrew word for the serpent that beguiled Eve. Now, the first civilization that perished in the judgment of the flood was Cainitic in origin. In other words, it was following after the way of Cain. Every element of material civilization And the development of arts and manufactures came about before the flood. Enoch, in whom the first city was named, he just means teacher. Teacher. But he was teaching along with others to do pleasurable things, to conquer, to develop, to build a civilization. You know, the early civilization would have been as splendid as that of Greece or Rome. But the divine judgment is according to the moral state. It's not according to the material. I mean, it's not bad that anybody builds or makes implements or metallurgy or any of these things. What is bad is they put them in place of God. Because the morals are so low, they don't want to turn to God, and they turn to material things. You know, the rapid advance in technology by pre-flood men was significant. You know, it's hard for us to understand this, but Stanford University did a study a while back, and they concluded that before the flood, there were approximately 9 billion people on the face of the earth. My goodness, there's only 3 to 4 billion now. 3 to 4 billion now, and there were 9 billion then. Now, the things that they were doing was urbanization, agriculture, animal domestication, and metallurgy. Adam's descendants did them fast. These, as other things were done, to stop God's plan for the earth. God's plan was to corrupt the earth because of what we had done. Now, archaeological discoveries have attested to the high degree of technology in these ancient times. And that allowed them to attempt to thwart the effects of the curse on the earth. You know, we have a tendency to think that, well, way back then, these people were cavemen and they couldn't speak and they didn't know about fire. Oh, that's not true at all. Adam was born fully intelligent, fully conscious. But when he turned away from God and they saw what they were living in, they started trying to mitigate the effects of the fall. Urban life was now preferred to tilling the ground, which is what they're supposed to do. Nomadic life was preferred to settling for agriculture. Cattle raising was now inaugurated. They didn't do that before. Metalworking tools were developed to ease the burden of the toil of the curse, working the soil, and to provide for weapons. Musical instruments, musical instruments primarily, were developed to mitigate the sorrow. Polygamy was introduced, and there was poetic boasting about how great mankind is. I want to spend just a few minutes talking about modern technology, because as in the days of Noah were, the rapid technology, it is increasing today at a very, very fast pace. You know, between 1867 and 1880, mankind developed the telephone, sound recording, typewriters, chemical pulp, and reinforced concrete. The reinforced concrete helped build real large cities in the United States after the Civil War. In the 1880s, it was a huge period of scientific advances that brought incandescent electric lights, electric motors, trains, the gramophone, which is an early phonograph, and a spread of photography. Now that technology was developed in the early 1800s, but it was spread widely and became real popular just about 1890, 1900. The internal combustion engine, aluminum production, and many, many more things came about in the late 1800s. Now, 1890 saw the introduction of diesel engines and x-rays and moving pictures, wireless telegraphy, radioactivity, and health things like the synthesis of aspirin. Now, in the period from the turn of the century through 1914, we saw the sudden upsurge of mass production, especially automobiles, which changed the United States from a slow-moving, horse-drawn society to a motorized one. Now, it was also during that period when the first airplane and tractors were developed, when vacuum diodes and triodes were perfected, along with the not the computerization, but the miniaturization of electronic equipment. When air conditioning, stainless steel, neon lights became elements also of the modern world. Now, the other inventions in communication were the radio, TV, and then finally the computer in the 20th century. Motorized transportation, went from horses to intercontinental air travel and space exploration in the 20th century. Think about that. Only 100 years. We're on horses, and now we can go out in space. Warfare technology went from a simple single-shot rifle, and in some cases, a multiple shotgun, the old Gatling guns of the Civil War area, to extremely deadly computerized intercontinental missiles and nuclear armaments. I mean, folks, the rapid expanse of technology in the 20th century is phenomenal. Now, these technological changes did one thing. They increased communication, increased the deadly capabilities between civilizations, and they decreased the personal communication between individuals. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, have you ever seen a group of people sitting around looking at their phones, looking at their iPhones or their smartphones? They're not talking to each other. They're texting somebody else, someplace else. They're not interacting with each other. You know, on another plane, electricity was probably the most radical change for everyday life because it allowed all these other things to take place. If one ignores the motors and the machines that it made possible, the mere existence of electric lights was an incredible revolution. The internal combustion engine was one of the period's greatest developments, and that led to a very, very rapid expanse of transportation. From a bicycle and horse to the horseless carriage in 1886, and finally railroads, airplanes, and space travel. What about buildings? The material available for buildings allowed skyscrapers into the 1930s of the Empire State Building and others beyond that were vastly higher, vastly bigger. You know, the first electric elevator was used in 1887. Now, we saw advances in communication and information. The telephone, the printing press, typesetting, the typewriter, paper manufacture, movies, photography, gramophone, as I mentioned, the radio. All these were developed and refined during this crucial period. All these individual innovations combined to change the way information was spread. And the effect of this was probably more disruptive than the information revolution of the late 20th century. The information revolution caused people to have more information and to talk less with each other. You know, this is a gradual revolution. It is also results in a decline in social behaviors. In the past, you'd slowly see people and get to know them. You'd see them every day, every second. You'd get to know their thoughts as they conveyed them and their body language and so on. But the internet has radically changed nearly every level of human experience in an incredibly short amount of time. Several decades ago, you used to write a letter and communicate with others far away. Now you can interact with them real time, with people all over the earth. Now that's just a few of the ways. What are the negative effects of this, though? There's isolation. Social isolation is characterized by just a lack of contact with other people, such as in the workplace and friends and social situation. You go into an office now, and everybody's staring into the computer. You go into a restaurant, everybody's staring into their phones. This results in a lack of personal social skills because people aren't meeting face to face much. We're losing the ability to read body language and get the social cues from other people. It increases depression because of the lack of human contact. And oversitting causes overeating and because of lack of exercise. Now, there's a reason that people use antidepressants in an ever increasing volume. It's interesting to see what this is doing. Some of the negative effects of technology can be linked directly to sleep habits. We get sucked into online activities and we stay up too late, and there's this constant stream of information that we keep getting prompted to pay attention to, and it's difficult to turn your brains off to this. Within the younger group, there's an increased amount of bullying because technology has caused people to be able to torment others from the safety of their own homes. It's crazy what is going on here, and there's an increase in teen suicides as a result of this. The internet has stripped us of the world of privacy. Long gone are the days of having an unlisted phone number and staying offline. You can't keep your information safe now. You have to protect it with services that will help you. There's just a higher level of deceit when people aren't talking to each other face to face. You call somebody and you talk to them about doing business with them, and you don't know who you're talking to. You don't know who they are. You don't know whether they're really going to do something to you or for you. There is just a lack of social boundaries now, too. Cyber stalking someone or sending unsolicited nude photos are just examples of grossly crossing social boundaries. People are now even getting something called revenge porn. They'll get photos that should never have been made in the first place of people, and they'll put them up on websites. There's also a lack of sexual boundaries. The young folks are exposed to so much sexual material that it is causing a rapid decrease in the morality of the society. And there's a lack of social bonds because they don't have that personal face-to-face interaction with people. It's just texting. You're looking at words that are written. That's all. You're not really talking to somebody and getting to know them and being with them. This is a constant distraction. A constant distraction, which limits people's attention span and causes addiction to these things. The net result of this is a general lack of empathy for other people and an increase in violence and developmental issues with children. Now, I'm not saying that technology is bad. I'm saying that there has been a rapid increase in technology that came about before the flood and now just before the Lord Jesus' second coming. And it's because people turned from God at the beginning and they tried to mitigate the effects of sin. That's why we do all these things. We're trying to make life better. But unfortunately, we're doing it without recognizing God. And God is going to bring judgment in the form of the tribulation on this earth. I would beg you to consider the claims of the Lord Jesus. If you believe that Jesus died and rose from the dead, truly believe that, God's Spirit will enter your heart and you will be on your way to heaven when your body fails someday. Or if the Lord comes for us first and takes the church, His genuine group of born-again believers, out of this world. God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you in our next session and continuing this series.
We hope you have been blessed by this message today on a contemporarily relevant Bible topic. Dr. Woodhead has been teaching the Bible for 25 years. He is a pastor, an author, and conference speaker on various biblical subjects. Dr. Woodhead is the Dean of the Jewish Studies School at Schofield Seminary. His seminary teaching includes the Old Testament and Biblical Hebrew. He has attended Hebrew University in Jerusalem and a Hebrew College in Massachusetts. If you would like a DVD of today's program, please write us at Post Office Box 48, Hart, Michigan 49420. Again, that's Post Office Box 48, Hart, Michigan 49420, or call us at 877-706-2479. That's 877-706-2479. Once again, 877-706-2479. The cost is $15. Let us know if you have any questions about today's broadcast. We look forward to providing you with continuing Bible messages each week on this station. God bless you.
Take us there to the land of Zion, next year in Jerusalem. L'Shana Haba'ah Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. O hear, O Israel, hear. O Lord, thy kingdom come, thy will be done next year. L'Shana Haba'ah Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Over there,